Phoenix is a lander that's going to the North Polar Highlands of Mars to look for evidence of habitable zones, places where life might have existed in the past.
Moving flight hardware, not even to mention an entire spacecraft, is usually a delicate affair. It's very meticulously coordinated. There's, arranging a police escort at 3 in the morning on a Monday morning, and all the state and local authorities that need to know about something like that, and all the paperwork that's required to essentially close down a section of the highway for a period of time. There's a whole analysis process that goes along with making sure that the spacecraft on the back of a truck, on a flatbed trailer, in the box that it is in, isn't going to be exposed to any environment that it's not rated for. So we know how much force a pothole in the road will induce on the spacecraft. Just a little bit into the trip, we had kind of a light rain. And that's another thing that just makes you ill at ease with your spacecraft that you've had in the clean room up until that point in time.
We have to fly a spacecraft on a plane.
You look at the box and you look at the aircraft and you wonder, is it going to fit in there? When they open those rear doors, there's this cavernous space inside. Even as big as it is, this box just barely fits inside of it. And it was a really kind of manual brute force operation.
It looks just like we're loading a box onto a plane. Inside this box is such an enormous treasure. This is something that these hundreds and hundreds of people have worked on to make it all come together. We've got Air Force pilots, most trustworthy people. They are flying this spacecraft from Denver to Cape Canaveral. And we trust these pilots, but we still worry. We're tracking this spacecraft and this plane as it's flying across the country. And as Florida comes into view, we think, oh, we're okay, and we can relax. We can't be relieved, because we have still a huge amount of work to do to get this spacecraft to the launch pad, assembled properly, all fueled up and ready to go to Mars. Phoenix is a lander that's going to the North Polar Highlands of Mars to look for evidence of habitable zones, places where life might have existed in the past.
We're going to be repeating a number of tests that we did back in Denver, both to fully check out the spacecraft after the shipment, as well as take on some minor updates to the software that we've been testing with overall. Once we get out into June, then we've got a month that we'll be installing the ordnance and explosives onto the spacecraft that it needs to both separate itself and deploy the parachute.
This phase of the mission is basically the final checkouts and closeouts of the vehicle in preparation to make it to the third stage and to transport it out to the pad and get it stacked on the rocket and, of course, get it launched.
The most challenging part is as you get closer and closer to the end, there's less and less room to recover if something doesn't go right. So, it's really just managing things and being on top of it. And you don't want to get to that point.
The biggest challenge this week is actually not the launch window per se, because it's an early morning launch, but we are in our peak afternoon thunderstorm time of the year. So the biggest challenges are the propellant loading that has taken place on the pad over the last couple of days, and it's been canceled because of the thunderstorms.
We were supposed to load oxidizer and then fuel onto the second stage of the launch vehicle today, and they got through the oxidizer load, and then the prediction for weather this afternoon was not good, so they decided to stand down from loading fuel, which means they have to load fuel tomorrow. And because of that, we'll likely slip the spacecraft launch from what was planned to be Friday morning to Saturday morning.
We have 2 days of our launch window before the shuttle. We have to stand down for the shuttle launch. And so we're hoping that if we either get off in the first 2 days or the shuttle gets off on its first day, so that then we can start planning to launch right after the shuttle.
7, 6, 5, 4. Main engine start. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of the Delta II rocket with Phoenix, a distant science outpost seeking clues of the evolution at the polar region of Mars.
Being on the program as long as I have, it's kind of like your kid going off to college. You're very excited, you're very happy, but also sad that your baby's basically going to go away, and you're not going to hear from it again for 8 or 9 months. There's a lot of joy, a lot of sadness, a lot of nervousness, but that's part of the job, and we all deal with it different ways.
The Mars Phoenix lander is headed for the north polar region of Mars, and its goal will be to search for habitable regions, places where life may have existed in the past.
The phase that we're in now is called cruise,
which sounds really easy and laid back, although it's actually a very busy time for the spacecraft teams.
We're busy making sure the systems of the spacecraft are working as they should.
The teams are busily preparing for the science that's going to occur after landing.
And the navigation team is getting ready to make sure that the spacecraft actually gets to its target on Mars.
It's very similar to the sport of archery. In archery, you have the archer who's standing some distance away from the target, and that person's job is to make sure that the arrow hits the target.
An archer will have to draw back the bow with a certain amount of force. Secondly, the archer has to make sure that he aims the arrow at a certain angle, and then that arrow actually has to traverse the correct amount of distance so that it hits the target. These three things have to come together just right.
With launching a spacecraft to Mars, it's a little different. The bow in this case is a 250-ton rocket.
Our arrow is the Phoenix spacecraft.
It has to travel over 420 million miles to its target.
It's 70 miles long by 15 miles wide.
This is like trying to shoot your arrow from Dodger Stadium and hitting home plate at Wrigley Field in Chicago.
So this seems almost like an impossible shot to take just in one single shot. So we actually make it a little more fair by having 6 opportunities to correct that trajectory along the way. Imagine if you could shoot an arrow stop it in its path, check to make sure if it's on course for the target, and if not, be able to nudge it back to its target so that it's headed for the right place. Now, of course, our spacecraft is moving at about 60,000 miles per hour. It never stops. So the corrections have to be performed along the way while the spacecraft is still in motion.
We track the spacecraft using the Deep Space. 22 hours prior to entry, we have one last chance to make a fine-tuning of where we're going to land.
The arrow hitting a target is a decent analogy for what the navigation team does.
But in reality, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Earth and Mars are rotating around the sun at various speeds and constant motion.
The spacecraft itself is moving very fast across the solar system. It's trying to hit a moving target, and that target is also spinning on its axis. And we have to keep all of these things in mind while we're attempting to hit this target. It's pretty challenging, all these things that you have to take into account and actually get done during this so-called cruise phase, where it's not laid back at all by any means.
Phoenix is the first Mars scout mission. It's the first mission that's going to try to land near the North Pole of Mars. And it's the first mission that's actually going to go try and reach out and touch water on the surface of another planet.
Where there tends to be water, at least on Earth, there tends to be life. And so it's potentially a place where life could have existed on the planet in the past.
The main purpose of EDL is to take a spacecraft that is traveling at 12,500 miles an hour and bring it to a screeching halt in a soft way in a very short time.
We enter the Martian atmosphere. We're 70 miles above the surface of Mars. And our lander is safely tucked inside what we call an aeroshell.
It looks kind of like an ice cream cone.
Now the front of it is this heat ship, this saucer-looking thing that has about a half inch of essentially what's cork on the front of it, which is our heat shield. Now this is really special cork, and this cork is what's going to protect us from the violent atmospheric entry that we're about to experience.
Friction really starts to build up on the spacecraft, and we use the friction when it is flying through the atmosphere to our advantage to slow us down.
From this point, we're going to decelerate from 12,500 miles an hour down to 900 miles an hour.
The outside can get almost as hot as the surface of the sun.
The temperature of the heat shield will reach 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit.
But the inside doesn't get very hot. It probably gets about room temperature.
There is this window of opportunity within which we can deploy the parachute.
If you fire the chute too early, the parachute itself
we've lost 99% of our entry velocity. So we're 99% of the way to where we want to be. But that last 1%, as it always seems to be, is the tricky one. Now,
Vedi, ma dwa nesta